This is a quote right out of the book, okay? And it basically says, if we do the needs statement analysis and we look hard at the marketplace and we develop a product that meets a critical unmet need, it lays the foundation for creating value. Value propositions, I mean, it does have value in the name, serve as a language that translates and connects invention to customers. And so what's a need statement? We know what a need statement is, right? And we can probably postulate what the need statement was for this. This is single port as it existed during a period of time when everybody thought, well, the logical next step for laparoscopy is instead of having 3 or 4 holes, why don't we just have one? We'll just do it here. We'll pack everything into that mega port and we'll do essentially single incision laparoscopy. Now, we could probably write the need statement they were thinking about, right? But why are these all different then? There's not a single one of them that is exactly like the other one. And so you can ask the question, well, there probably was a pretty strong needs statement here because they knew what they were going to solve as or address as a problem, and they knew what the population was that was associated with that, and they knew what the outcome was, but they still ended up in a conversation about whether it should be blue or maybe ours should be purple. That's not an outcome. That's a feature, okay? It's an aspect of the solution meant to create some value. Now, maybe the value that was created was simply to differentiate ours from theirs because they're so similar. So if you have one against the other, what are you going to start to look for? You're going to start to look for distinguishing attributes and features. And you can almost imagine yourself in the brainstormer in these rooms where they were thinking about committing to develop these products and think about what that conversation was like. The basic parameters of the solution were pretty clear. All that was left was for them to develop a language of differentiation. When we think about the notion of where need statements border up to business models, this is AFib, okay? And as I'm sure many of you recognize, there's lots of different ways to approach a set of therapeutic approaches to AFib. And this just gives you the kind of classic range, you know, pure disposable, hardware and disposable, implantable model, capital equipment service with a disposable. The root of this is we're trying to address AFib. And there's a set of very well articulated need statements, but the expression of it in terms of solutions creates very different opportunities to differentiate and distinguish it with respect to what? Value propositions. Now, today you'd have to add to this business model construct, you'd have to say, what if we could all, you know, cure AFib with a cell phone, right? I mean, we've created a world where the alternative models for addressing any given need statement are very rich and very broad, and provide us with an opportunity to sort of choose which bundle of features and benefits we want to take on. You know, who's sort of the old thing, you know, hospitals really have a hard time dealing with capital equipment. Well, do you want to be selling a capital equipment solution? Maybe not, because that's hard. If you said go for, you know, what's the easiest one to sell, you might say, I just do that disposable thing, 6 in a box. You sell it, you use it, it's gone. Again, features. Okay, those are features, and they translate into value just like ours is blue, yours is purple. They translate into value propositions. So what is a value proposition? This is a value proposition, okay? What's the need statement? Get you out of doing homework, right? Yeah. So, but these are two different approaches to get to that objective, all right? The outcome is you didn't have to do your homework, right? All right, okay? But what do we see here? Okay, you start to see the language of features and benefits. You start to see the language of value propositions because you're in a different phase and stage of the innovation process. You already know kind of what you're building a solution for, which is that need statement. But now the question is, when I build it this way, what vocabulary options will it open to me so that I can connect it to a customer? Now, if you're trying to connect to a customer that has $1, maybe you can do the one with $1. But if you're not, maybe you can't. And so all of a sudden now that language is starting to moderate how your invention translates to the customer. So this is a way to kind of distill the essence of what I'm trying to articulate with you here. And that is a value proposition links the customer to the concept, through language in a way which maximizes the likelihood they will change behavior. Now, what does change behavior mean? Buy it. Not like it, not admire it, not, buy it. That's really important because this is what's going on as you progress with the innovation process. If you think about where we are in the world of need statements, we've said from the outset, it's the DNA of a great invention. Problem, population, outcome. Selling, okay, is about benefits, costs, value. It's about, in classic language of marketeers, it's about features and benefits. What are my features and benefits, and what's it going to cost you? And that's the language of sales, okay? Value propositions tend to be the underlying bedrock of innovation. As it translates through business models and it translates through developments that begin to pick out differentiations that we think, believe, or convince ourselves that will matter, like one's blue and one's purple, okay? We enter a different realm. And the realm we enter is the realm of sales. It's sale, it's selling. And so you can think about, as you conceptualize a solution, whether it's a disposable, whether it's a piece of capital equipment with a disposable, but whether it's a, was it the potato that had a service with it? I can't remember, but we could attach a service to the potato. So it's the intersection between the invention and the sale that sort of forces out the notion of a value proposition. Now, what happens in the construct in biodesign is that we actually wrestle with this in the format of the need specification. Must have and nice to haves. Often the nice to haves, if you examine them, they look a lot like features and benefits. It'd be really, and we could treat this, but it'd be really cool if we could do all this, right? It's the shiny part of your solution, because you look at it and you go, hey, wouldn't it be cool if, right? Well, you're right on the edge of thinking about it as what? As a customer, okay? Not as an innovator, as a customer, okay? And so it's important to understand how you're moving through this progression. This is an example that's out of Kaifon, which is a company founded by Karen Talmadge. And I first met Karen when she came to my office, and she had I think it was a drinking straw, and it had a toy balloon attached to the end of it. It looked like she bought it like Toys R Us. And she put it on the table and she said, I need you to build a balloon, because we happen to be pretty good at building balloons. And so we started a conversation, and she said she was going to take methyl methacrylate and put that balloon in a disc and stuff it full of methyl methacrylate, and then that was going to harden and restore the height of that disc. That's what she said. What she had was a drinking straw and a toy balloon. Okay. Now, her value proposition at that point in time was what? Maybe that works. She didn't have a single patient. I'm not even sure she had an animal at that point. Okay. So she had a concept for a solution to a need statement, problem, degenerative disc disease, compression. Could I restore height? Yeah. What if I created a way to restore height in that disc minimally invasively by what? You could do it with a jackhammer, I mean, there's a bunch of it, but she thought, well, I'll put a balloon in there and I'll fill it full of bone cement effectively. Okay. But she didn't have a lot to work with on value proposition, right? And so can you imagine her early conversations? So she could go to a clinician and say, this might work. I have no data. So, but you still have to engage. So who's the customer at this stage of an invention? Who's the real customer, do you think? This is kind of an interesting thing to think about. Is there a real customer?
I guess you could think like potential investors and like potential high talent employees that you want to bring on board to help you along the journey.
Yeah, you're looking for money and credibility, and those are two ways, to think about that. Those are customers, and you've also probably got a layer of who else? Who else is in this play? Huh?
A spine surgeon.
Yeah. Ultimately, there's going to be somebody who's going to use this balloon on a stick to treat a patient. That's going to be a surgeon, okay? And so that community, even though all I've got is this kind of floppy, prototype, is the customer, okay? For what? For the value proposition, okay? And so sometimes that value proposition is as simple as, I need to do a couple of animals. I'd really like some help. I need the insight that you have into the physiology and the procedural constraints and challenges. And it would be really cool if you'd help me. I don't know if this works or not, but who knows? You might get a paper out. What's the value proposition? If you're that clinician, it's not going to be treating 100,000 patients next year. It's going to be getting a paper, or maybe you get on a podium, maybe at the next meeting, you'll have a chance to share with your peers that experience. Is that derivative of the need statement? Not at all. It's selling, okay? It's very transactional. Spine surgeon, I really need your help. Here's what I have. Here's what I can give you, okay? It's transactional, okay? Now, what happens over time is that, as we've said before, the need statement's relatively speaking very stable. It's stable. There are companies, and some of which we'll talk about a little bit in the panel, where the fundamental outlines of the need statement remain pretty stable. They're not very dynamic, okay? They're the same 5 years from now. As Karen went along, and she did go along, by the way, from the straw with the balloon, okay? Her need statement was extremely stable, okay? But what was changing was her interface with customers and the language that she used to convey value proposition. Okay, so a little further down the road, she ends up with method IP. That was really interesting because most people looked at that straw in a balloon and said, ah, there are going to be 50 of those, so why do I need to talk to Karen? Until she said, you have to talk to me because I'm the only one who can do this. Okay, now, what is that? That's a value proposition. Okay, it's the same need statement. Okay. And then she started to develop a clinical data set. Now, a little bit further down the line, as her company grew, and it grew, okay, she was treating zillions of patients with these little balloons on a stick, and they were still balloons on a stick, okay. She had lots of incremental innovations that she was able to attach around that platform. But she also had competition coming because she was actually around long enough for those early patents to start to age a bit. And so she was clearly going to have to, you know, sort of evolve the concept. Ultimately, her pitch to various institutions changed. Instead of the new competitor with a balloon who says, well, yeah, we treated 100 patients, she would say, well, we've treated 20,000 patients. So do you want to take a chance on that one, or do you want to use ours because we got all this data? Is the need statement any different? No. Is the value proposition changing? Absolutely, because it's transactional. Okay. So a single need statement drives a great invention, but it's likely to be stable over time. The good news for you, and I think for all innovations that are built on that need statement foundation, is need statements tend to be very stable. Good ones last a long time. What changes, though, is the value propositions, and they're customized for the stakeholder. If you're the clinician who's kind of going, why am I talking to you? It's very different than if you're the investor going, Karen, you got nothing here. Okay, I'll give you a pre-money of $2.50, and you can, you know, go build another prototype. Okay, it's a different transactional environment. Why? Well, because the stakeholder is different. But the language is all transactional because it's about value propositions. For you, I'm going to give you podium time. For you as an investor, I'm going to hint that maybe this turns into a lot of money. And so if you help me, maybe you win. By the way, those investors won. She sold it for $5.5 billion. Okay. They definitely won. There is a place in the creation of value propositions where one of the pitfalls is to believe that we can sell anything to anyone. Because when you're selling, okay, and you know, if you go through the exercise of, you know, you don't have a paycheck this week unless you sell. You start to get this in very, very sharp relief. It's very, very tangible. But if your livelihood depends on transacting, you get really aggressive and really creative about value propositions because you are singularly focused on that stakeholder that you're dealing with and the opportunity to transact. You are trying to get a customer to buy. Okay. Now, what's one of the pitfalls of that? I worked at Guidant for a while, and the CEO had a small conference room off to the side of his office, and it had a little table and 4 chairs. It had only one piece of art in the room, and it was the tiniest little thing. It was only this big. It was like 3 inches by 5 inches in this kind of relatively generous conference room. And so you had to walk up to it and stare like this to even see what it was, okay? And what it was a little picture of a conductor and a sheet of music and a stool with a pig sitting on it. And at the bottom it said, "You cannot teach a pig to sing." And that's all it said. So in this context, what I want you to contemplate is I love marketing, and I love the power of salespeople in translating that value proposition to a transactional head and then getting you to give me your money for something I'm selling you. Okay, I love that. On the other hand, okay, there are real limits, and sometimes we find ourselves pushing those limits when we manufacture the reasons why our customer is going to be interested in this through a value proposition. One of the classic examples of this is where you take the field of surgical retraction, for example. Everybody knows what surgical retraction is, right? Well, since metal became available, we've used metal retractors in surgery, right? But then when minimally invasive surgery was sort of on fire and created as a new market opportunity, people started going, well, there's that metal trocar that we use, but we could also have a plastic one. And then all of a sudden those businesses get really big because you're throwing that plastic away. Well, people very quickly said, what else are we using in the procedure? And the first thing they did was create plastic retractors. And then they tried to convince the market that that plastic retractor was the right solution, which by and large it proved not to be, but they poured their hearts into convincing people. Why? Well, because it wasn't necessarily the customer who was perceiving that value proposition. It was the inventors who were selling those disposable retractors who perceived that they would make more money if you bought a retractor from me every, 2 hours than once every 6 months. Okay. That inverts this notion of transaction and value and connecting with your customer through a transactional value. So don't be delusional is my advice to you on this. And just remember that sometimes when you confuse the targeting on a stakeholder and the transactional nature of this, you can lose sight of the value proposition, and you can drive down a really, really dark hole here and create things that are not wanted, in fact, by anyone other than you. You're the inventor, not the customer. Customers get to decide if they see value in your solution, and ultimately they define it in their own terms. You can't market past the truth of a customer. Customers have their own truth. You can fuzz the edges, but the truth of the matter is you need to understand that customer. As an entrepreneur, you get to decide whether there's an opportunity there to create value or not. Just don't mistake sort of false signals that there's a way for you to sell past objections, if you will, if in fact they're founded in the reality and the truth of the customer, because they will win every time. Okay, they do win. The market is, relatively speaking, efficient, and value propositions can simply be thought as a way to link the two.